Allow your awareness to sink. Allow your breath to slow down. I'm trying to shape this whole series as an educational series, and so each class lets us know a little more deeply how to practice. Softening through the whole body. Crown of the head floats up. Softening your legs. Allow your arms to drape on the side of your body, just like in standing posture, so that you're not rolling forward or pulled back. Instead, just allow your elbows to gently bend, settling onto your thighs if that's the comfortable position for you. Your chest is soft, your belly is relaxed, so that chi can sink down. Letting go.
Del just joined.
Oh, welcome, Del. Just in time for the good stuff. Softer and more relaxed with every moment. With every exhalation, releasing any holding patterns in the body. You can exhale gently through the mouth if that helps. With every inhalation, allowing stillness to deepen as your whole system becomes clear and quiet. This is the secret to developing the practice. For those of you that have watched some of my series with the guqin, the instrument, this is the same quality that we're cultivating, this still present state. The mind is quiet, fully present. The breath is easy. The whole body is released. You can allow your eyes to be half closed.
We have a question anytime you're ready for it.
Sure.
Is this essentially entering Wuji?
Wuji, the state is a pretty high level state, so yes, in the sense that it's the undifferentiated state. A lot of practices are called Wuji, so I have to be careful how I answer that because it can sound confusing if you think I'm talking about a separate practice. And every system calls a different thing Wuji. Wuji, it just means Wu is a negation of something. It's saying without or not. Ji is the same Ji that's in Taiji Chuan, which is like an extreme. It's an end of something, one end or the other. And so when you don't have an end, you just have the whole thing, no ends. It's all one, is the idea, Wuji, or before one, when everything is together. And so if you have cultivated the ability to rest in that undifferentiated state, then yes, that's what this is. And then when you're ready, bringing fresh chi to the palms, softening your hands, your wrists. Over the course of the 100 days, we want this softness to slowly spread into the rest of the body. So for right now, we have the fingers, the hands, and the wrists. We want this space here, this sense of softness to ease into the forearm. Allow that to become part of your practice. Not holding on to anything. And we're going to gently circle on the top of the head. Opening Bai Hui. Releasing the neck so that the crown of the head seems to float upward, letting go of anything that's pulling your head down. Softening your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists, your hands. Awakening the top of the head in both directions.
We have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm doing standing practice with the goal to sink and relax, is the goal to also enter Wuji or just relax?
That would be just relax because we have a goal at that point. Wuji is no goal, not doing anything. If you're having a practice and you're accomplishing something, then by definition, that's not Wuji. Although, again, this is tricky because in a way, an aspect of you is always Wuji. That is your nature. But that's difficult to describe. And so when you're practicing awareness resting in that state and only that state, that's Wuji. That's one way of describing it. But it is true that there are people that will practice standing posture, sinking their chi, and call that Wuji, which is why it's confusing because, in my opinion, they're misusing the word. So if you have an intent, you've stepped out of Wuji, but possibly into a practice called Wuji. Good luck with that.
And a clarification from that questioner, and by standing practice, I mean basic Qigong posture. And they say, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. It's often called Wuji.
And Corry joined.
Corry's here. Welcome. How wonderful. Corry, we are lost in the snowdrifts up here.
Del says he's going to start calling you young Ken Cohen.
Oh, gosh. Ken Cohen, I've spent a lot of time with, actually. Not a lot of time, but we've chatted a bunch of times. For a while, I drove him around when he came to my city, and we had tea several times. And he comes occasionally to study with my instructor in Seattle. They shared a teacher when they were younger, Madame Gao. And now he comes, and Master ZhiCheng is everybody's person they look up to and try to learn from. And I look up to Ken Cohen as a wonderful teacher. He's a really great guy. And I wish he would come by to study with Master ZhiCheng more, because Master ZhiCheng always is like, oh, I want to show him this. But Ken Cohen is so busy with his own life and his own practices, and he studies traditional First Nations styles of practice as well. And so his dance card is very full, but a very kind guy and a wonderful intellect. He enjoys tea as much as I do, which is a rare and beautiful thing.
And Mags joined.
Mags. Welcome, Mags. I don't know what that accent is.
I don't either.
Please do not be insulted. Oh, that's my sound.
Del says your teacher must be amazing if he's taught Master Cohen.
Oh, he's amazing. Yeah. Master Cohen is a wonderful teacher. And in my opinion, Master ZhiCheng is an entirely separate plateau of skill than all of us.
Mag says, sounds Irish.
Sorry about that. Northern Irish or Southern Irish? Someone's going to get mad at me somewhere. I should just stop with accents entirely. Melanie is particularly good with accents. She just starts pretending and naturally slips into it and can have whole conversations. I do not know how she does that. it is difficult enough for me to speak with a California accent. So I feel like it's a skill that I've never been able to pick up. Warmth soaking into the face, warming around and behind the eyes. Off to the sides. I honestly feel like it must be especially difficult for high-level practitioners to find the opportunity to train with other people, either because it puts their reputation at risk. Oh, you're studying with this other person. And for so many people, reputation is everything. Or like with Master ZhiCheng, it's very difficult for him to find people to practice with or to do push hands with or these things, because his casual skill is so much higher than everybody else's that I've seen him with, that he simply softens and relaxes. He just lets go and people fall down. And how do you practice unless you go hunt people down? And very often, especially in the world of these arts, there's a lot of ego and worry of losing face and all these things. And so I think that in this world among high-level practitioners, somehow the stakes go up, even though it feels like they should go down. Because you've already accomplished. Now you can share with other people who love it as much as you do. But from what I've been witnessing as I've spent my life traveling around studying with all these masters, there's greater pressure on them to perform or to be the best or to be the one. And so one of the things I really appreciate about Master ZhiCheng is he doesn't play those games. He barely promotes himself on his own webpage. And he only does that because the board pressed him into it.
The board of directors.
The board of directors, because they said, you have to tell people who you are. He just likes to practice and be quiet and invisible, and his skill is off the charts. I've met people who just, they stumble into him. You know, they say, oh, I want to do Tai Chi on the weekends or something. And so they find the local classes and they sign up, and he's very inexpensive and very kind. And I tell people that I run into that it's very much like you deciding to take up golf on the weekends just for fun. And you stumble into a class, a community class that's being run inexpensively by Tiger Woods or these whoever, you know, substitute in the world's greatest of something, and they've just decided to start teaching a little on the side, and the people that come have no idea who they're studying with, because how could they know? And that's what it is with Master ZhiCheng. I travel around the world and people know who he is. People come to him, but people locally have no idea who they're practicing with. It's really funny. So part of my job out here is to let people know just what they've got and to take advantage of it while he's here before he retires completely.
Corry says, and he's so generous and kind with his teaching too.
He really is. Yeah, just a wonderful guy. He's one of those people that he is not only an expert within these several skills and styles that he teaches, which by itself is a remarkable achievement for any human, but he's also taken the time to become an expert instructor. He learns to teach it because, of course, that famous thing, those who can do something aren't very good teachers. And he's managed to do both because he really cares. Gosh. So he's my standard to work up to, which is why I feel like I have zero accomplishment. Do you have thoughts about that, Mel, since you study with him as well?
Oh yeah, I was just reading some of the other comments. Del says he wants to play push hands with him, but first I have to learn push hands.
Yeah, so do we all.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't feel like I have the skill to do push hands quite yet, but what Shifu ZhiCheng has taught me with respect to standing posture is just amazing.
Mhm.
Like I didn't realize how much I was constricting my breathing before I started practicing with him,
Right?
and how much that affects everything that you do. It's really amazing.
It is amazing. On the drive up here in the snow, we spent most of the time on the phone with him, chatting about training methods and the future practice and translations that we can do together in order to teach. And this is what he does all the time. He's just always on, always giving, always trying to help. There isn't a time when he doesn't do that. All of his money goes toward building the centers, making practice spaces available. He is a bar above everybody that we should all aspire to. And even this set that we're practicing right now, it's a compilation that he has carefully worked on, revised, and revised again over the course of decades to make it only the most important points and only the best sequence. And I just get to borrow it. He did all the work. So again, I hope everybody can appreciate this gift that he's left us and takes advantage of it.
We have another question here. The other day you said that the closing practice is foundational Daoist practice. How does, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation probably, Zhanzhuang,
Zhanzhuang, standing
Zhanzhuang.
posture. Yeah.
Standing meditation considered in terms of Daoist foundations?
Sure. I will talk about it after this. So again, just for those of you who can't remember the sequence right away, we are going to massage this line in front of the ear and just behind the ear, rubbing up and down, warming the space just beneath the skin. Please do not press too hard. Practice until that sense of heat soaks into this space around and in front and behind the ear. And then we'll do the same over the ears until the whole ears are warm. And again, that feeling of warm oil being poured into the ear and heat radiating back out, comfortably radiating back out, not super hot. And then we will massage the ears, rub around the rim of the ears to heat them up, compress the ears. I'll do them 18 times gently. And then with the last compression, tapping the fingers against the back of the head. And then sinking the chi downward.
you.
Anna, welcome. Closing. Everything gathers, sinks down. Nothing trapped in your head or your shoulders. You never want chi stuck up in your head or your upper body. Let everything sink. The healthy quality for the whole upper energy center is clear and open, empty, free. Chi trapped up here is bad for your health. So instead, we allow it to coalesce and condense down below. Just a few breaths of meditation. Let your whole body and mind become quiet. So for the question about standing posture, in Daoist practice, there are, 4 or 5 very important postures: sitting, lying, standing, and walking. And which is to say, all of the postures, all of the time, that every aspect of practice and cultivation should be found in every part of life. And so standing posture is definitely one of the foundational practices. But as with everything, it depends how you're doing the standing posture and what you're doing in it, because it is a blank slate within which you can do just about anything. And so it always needs to be more specific. This is Zhicheng just means standing like a stake. It just means standing upright. And so it's like saying seated posture. So yes, seated posture is basic to any Daoist practice or internal cultivation method. And that when you're calling closing, where your awareness rests inside and all natures of aspects of your mind and body presence accumulate inside, the 3 natures moving into one that we talked about, that is more of the fundamental Daoist quality, where everything collects and settles. That's a very important practice. Delicious. Regular green tea. And then beginning to soften. Opening the shoulder well.
Phil says, what's amazing is when you practice Qigong consistently, you learn not to get sick. I just beat a sore throat in a few hours. I got strong white blood cells thanks to consistent Qigong.
It is wonderful, yeah. And at the same time, just to make sure that we talk about it, because I think what you're saying is wonderful. It is also possible to not allow yourself to become sick. And so, for instance, was it last year? With the vaccinations and COVID going around, we decided to get the vaccines. And historically, except for this time, the vaccinations always made us pretty sick for a day or two. Our immune systems responded pretty strongly. And so we both got them at the same time, realizing our mistake, because I wanted to be able to take care of Mel if she was sick, and she wants to be able to take care of me if I'm sick. And so I decided that even though I felt that immune system response coming on, that I decided to suppress it. And so I kept myself from getting sick. And it was very interesting because it was nice to know that you can do that kind of thing. Just be like, no, I can't get sick right now. And at the same time, I recognized that that act of refusing to let myself be sick was actually an unhealthy thing for me. In the way that you can refuse to let yourself feel tired, or you can refuse to let yourself feel pain. And from the Taoist perspective, that's a very unhealthy way to be. And I spent my whole life doing that. And I had, if you ever delve on my Patreon, I have all kinds of stories that I tell I call them Free and Easy Wander, and it's just my place to talk about my history and what I did and all that kind of stuff. I have a bunch of stories up, maybe a dozen or something. And one of the ways that I came about studying these practices was from the martial arts and learning unhealthy methods. And a lot of them were methods, for instance, that would keep me from ever feeling tired, or it would keep me from ever letting my mood drop, these kinds of things. And I used them in a very unhealthy way for a very long time, and my body crashed because of it. And it wasn't until I came to study with Master ZhiCheng that he forcibly straightened me out, which I'm very grateful for. And so if you ever feel like listening to those stories, tell me what you think. But I feel like, and I'm not saying this is what you did, but I feel like it's always worth mentioning that you want to become healthy enough so that your body can heal from sickness or prevent it as best you can in the healthy way. But we never want to avoid or deny sickness. In the same way that if we're cold, we want to feel the cold. We want to know that we're cold. It's good to know when we're cold. It's good to know when we're hungry. We could suppress the feeling of hunger, and people do, but then we become disconnected from our body. Same thing happens with our emotions. I became disconnected from sadness and fear because I wouldn't let myself feel it. And it is very healthy and very important to feel your sickness, to feel your weakness, to feel your sadness in your heart, because otherwise bad things result. And that is a very common trend in Qigong that I'm not saying you're doing this, but I want to speak out in favor of our humanness. And I feel like that's a very healthy way to be.
Let's see, try a couple others. Are you familiar with, apologies for my pronunciation, Zhicheng Qigong? ZhiCheng.
I mean, you pronounced it right. No. Zhi might be wisdom.
It's one word, so I don't know if the ZHI is pronounced the same.
It is. Yeah, okay. It's same syllables if it's pinyin. So Zhi maybe, I'm guessing, wisdom. And maybe Nung is like ability. Could be. I mean, again, it's Chinese, so it could be hundreds of meanings. I'd have to see the characters.
He says it was discovered by Master Peng, currently taught by Master Mingtong Gu.
Okay. No, I have no idea.
He says, yes, it's wisdom / heart Qigong.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, I don't know anything about it enough to have an opinion. I'm happy to be one of those people that just doesn't have an opinion about things I don't know about. I have mastered the Daoist ability to go,
He says, just wondering, thought you might like it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I don't know anything about it.
He says, kind of focused in the healing side of Qigong.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, this system that I'm part of it's got me, I have so many more things to work on than I possibly have time for. And I've just added new things with my musical instrument study. So I am a long ways away from checking into other people's systems. So I'm so happy with what I've got here. But tell me what you think if you decide to look into it. I will live vicariously through you. Softening your whole body, letting everything become warm. Remember that you are releasing these outward toward the surface of your body, but also toward the extremities. The snow is really coming down now. It's beautiful. Do you have any thoughts about that stuff?
What were we talking about before the wisdom Qigong?
Any of it.
Any of it?
The willingness to be vulnerable and sick, and we talked about the basics of standing posture, and we talked about Wuji before that. Mel knows so many things that I'm slowly trying to bring her into the conversation so you can benefit as much as I do.
Well, I was really struck by something John taught me a few years ago. I can't remember the context of the discussion, but he shared that very often people will become sick once they go on vacation or when they retire. That was something he said he saw a lot in the clinic. Do you want to speak to why that is?
It's a really interesting point. Yeah, and this is a thing that a lot of people know. Often if I bring it up in the clinic, I'll tell the first half and they finish the second half. That people, they work for years, they have a very busy job, a very busy life with their family, and they never get sick. They can't get sick. They can't afford to be sick, and so they don't get sick. And then they finally get that sabbatical, or they take the 2 weeks off or something, the 1 month off. And I always in the clinic, I just say, so what happens? And everybody says the same thing. Oh, that's when they get sick. And from this perspective in Chinese medicine, there is a way that we can put off illness. We sort of set it aside. There's this aspect of the body called the xiaoyang. It's this in-between space, the liminal space. And we can set things aside. Even our lymphatic system does that. And we have to deal with it at some point. And if we don't, it starts to erupt and become a compound, very complicated problem that appears throughout our whole lives. And so taking the time to deal with these illnesses that have been set aside for a future date, like a bill left unpaid, it's very important. And this desire that we have that comes from at least the culture that I've lived in, to always push forward, to always do more, to always get more. It's that unlimited growth idea. And to never allow yourself to stop and go backward, to never pause and to let yourself catch up. It's a very common way to be. One of the examples I like to give is that a house that I lived in when I was training, I was doing cage fighting and teaching, and I had open letters asking people to come and fight with me in the park, and I used to post them around town. And this was this life I was living with these two other people, and we wanted to be very hard. We had charts on the walls that would count off thousands of hours of standing or different kinds of training, and this is what we did. We went to the gym and we pushed ourselves. And I would sit around in my car with my iron palm bag, working on things while I was driving. We didn't even have chairs in our house because we never wanted to be sitting down, right? So unhealthy. And it took me years, it has taken me years, to continually try to heal some of that damage, because you cannot pretend like there's no cost for that. Everything has a price. And so part of wisdom is knowing how to balance and heal and to recognize our needs. Otherwise, the interest that accrues on those particular debts, eventually they bankrupt you into the grave.
So we have a question from Chris. Can you go over the source points when you get to them?
The source points? Okay. Are you talking about source points on channels? Like right here, lung 9 is a source point for the channel. But I'm not sure why you want to know or what that's about. Again, these terms like source probably comes from the Chinese word yin, but people translate that in all different ways. And so I have to know what you're talking about.
He said yes to the last.
Okay. Is it that you're wanting to know just to learn about acupressure? Because it's better just to get that series from a book. Because I feel like it will just make everything very intellectual. Because we don't do all the source points in this set. But you can add them if you want. It's certainly okay to add them. It'll just start to get heavy into Chinese medicine theory. Fresh Qi. So I highly recommend if you're going to study and you decide to start doing acupressure on those points, to spend time with them. But they don't always relate to the fascial system the way that we're treating it here.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, but it is a good question, and it is worth learning about that stuff. If you're wanting to study about it, I was telling Chris that my favorite book that I've looked at so far for learning the acupoints in particular that talk about each of the acupoints, whatever the latest version of the book that is always updated by Deadman, Peter Deadman, wonderful author. Him and his team, they do a great job, and always get whatever the latest version is because they're constantly correcting translations and things. And if you want to study the basics of Chinese medicine the way a student would, as though you were going to work in the clinic, then there's a wonderful foundation book that is also constantly being updated and getting thicker all the time by a writer named Matsuotsa, Giovanni Matsuotsa. And wonderful charts and descriptions of what it means, qi and blood and these kinds of things. The Foundations book is really great. But it's at the level of people who want to start using it. It's not really a exploration of the ideas. And Corry, if you want to read them, you have access to the giant libraries at TSI. There's 2 big libraries there. The one downstairs, for a while I was living in TSI, more or less, because I was working in town and I didn't want to drive all the way back up to the monastery, so I was sleeping in the library. And I would organize the libraries at night. And so all of the Chinese medicine stuff is downstairs. And you can find these books by Matsuotsa there. As one of my copies is there.
For those who don't know, TSI being?
Oh, TSI being the shirt that I was wearing yesterday, the Daoist Studies Institute.org. If you want to look it up, Daoist with a T, even though it's better to use a D in modern language. Oops, sorry, probably just do one side at a time. Creating these movements until you're warm and soft, as long as it takes. And then closing. Again, letting everything settle. Nestling into that space behind the navel. Warming and softening the sternum. Again, emphasizing that downward direction. And remember, as we did the other day, if you'd like to spend time doing the extra work around breast tissue that may need some extra attention, please do feel free to take that time. It's a wonderful practice.
I have another question.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on tea sharing its wisdom, the drinker? Or is that woo-woo? Sorry, I probably, my intonation is wrong. On tea, sharing its wisdom with the drinker.
I was very curious about that. Like, are you talking about COVID? Like, what are tea sharing?
I assume that means like reading tea leaves, perhaps, or like finding wisdom in the tea. Del, correct me if I'm mistaken.
Is this the way of tea we're talking about, or Mel's wanting to read tea leaves?
No, I am interested in it though. John learned how to do that. Actually.
I did. Easing all the way down to the solar plexus. Remember the kinds of emotion that are trapped in this area of the body and the qualities that we generate in ourselves that ease that emotion. And perhaps those of you that remember can put that information into the chat box. Since you're also busily typing, you can include that for people.
We have another question. If I'm working on points like LV3, should I just use the same pressure as we do for this fascia massage?
Not necessarily. The pressure that we put into the points changes depending upon the outcome we're trying to create. Lighter pressure tends to be more nourishing. Harder pressure tends to be more dispersing, as a general rule, but not always. And so I would say medium pressure to be safe. Don't push so hard that you cause yourself pain or do damage to the tissue. People do that kind of thing. It's really about stimulating and connecting with the point. This particular set that we're doing is especially light because we're just reaching that layer beneath, barely sinking into the body, warming and softening that layer of the body. Easing our intent, our softness, our friendliness, our attention. Hopefully our attention. There's a lot of questions coming through. I'm hoping you're practicing. Questions are good, but practice is better.
And if you prefer, we can always save them for the end, so just let me know.
Sure, yeah.
So a clarification on the tea question, just in general, like the trees that grow the tea leaves have wisdom in them that they impart on the drinker, that kind of thing. Sure,
plant medicine, yeah. Let's say that one to the end. That's a big question, yeah. Oh.
John does have a very interesting tree story that he's published to his Patreon.
That's
kind of
tree
related
story.
To it.
That's true.
John gained a lot of wisdom from a tree once.
It hit me on the head. I woke up, didn't remember who I was. Warming the belly. Yeah, and Del, you asked, by the way, I forgot to respond. You had asked about where to find these videos. That for the people that come, if you just save the links someplace, write them down, whatever, you can always come back to them. I do not delete them. And you can read the chats and things like that. But because I want to keep things private for people that are in here, I take these and I republish them. I cut them out a little bit so it's edited. And then I republish them as a separate video. And I make that private to YouTube. And it's just over on Patreon. And so there's a folder called Qigong Self-Massage or something like that. And so all of these are over there. I also have a folder called Group Classes where I put anything like this, Tai Chi sessions, things like that. They're all tucked in that folder as well. Warming your belly. Have that sense of warmth soaking in. Gentle circles. My instructor would say, too much ko gong, too much mouth gong. You do qi gong instead. allowing everything to move down. Turn around. My fancy stool that Chris got me. Everything we have is donated, and so I appreciate any donations that people send. This is a very comfy chair. Feels so nice. Ah. And again, just in case there's anybody here who's watching this and trying it for the very first time, please do let me know in the comment section, because we can't see who's here unless you comment. And I'm happy to give more detail about what we're doing. Otherwise, I just assume that the people here have been doing it for a while.
Bill says this feels like the love I never had.
I think that's the right thing. That's the right direction. Not the never having part, but it's funny, in our culture that I assume most of us share, we're big on self-discipline. We're happy to smack ourselves around. But how often do we take for self-love? It's a pretty stark difference. Oops. Just behind the knee. Stomach 36. You can just warm and nourish this singular point. You can use your fingertips or your palm, emphasizing this movement downward along the channel. 36 circles in both directions. You can always do more. And then just outside and above that, gallbladder 34. Again, if you have trouble finding these points, please do look them up. There are tutorials all over the place online. Softening this space open. The imbalance at this space is reflected in things being tight, drawn tight, like a drum skin pulled too tight. We release that whole space, softening and warming, easing it open. And if you'd like to do spleen 9 just on the inside here, the top of the shin. I'll let my thumb touch this point on the side of the thighs as well.
We have a question. This space connects all the sinews of the body? The one before spleen 9 you are doing now? That's right.
Gallbladder 34. It's the control point for the sinews in acupuncture. I mean, it doesn't literally connect all the sinews in the body. You got them all over the place. But it is an aspect of a center in your body that reflects that level of connectivity in the body. And by softening there, it tends to soften the chi through the whole body. But of course, especially right at the knee. Yeah, so any kind of sinew injury can be benefited by softening and nourishing that point. And he does have a wonderful book out called The Way of Qigong. He's a fantastic writer, very clear. And I don't agree with everything that he says, the context of it, because there's so many ways of approaching Qigong and Taoism. But the book, and so for people looking for a fun Qigong book, I can't say that I love all parts of it, but I do love the writing and his characterization and where he's coming from. And so that is a really fun book to read. And then just make your own choices about some of the things that he teaches. I think he's actually about to do a tour in Europe, teaching the Hunyuan Qigong system, or what he knows of it. So if you're in Europe and you're interested in the basics of the Hunyuan Qigong set, you could go to one of his seminars. Probably very expensive, but he is a great teacher. Just a genuinely charming guy, good storyteller.
Okay, we have another question. When we do when do we have to do the points on the head, or can we say start at the neck or chest? I don't want to put any more energy up there, and I don't know if I can sync properly. That's a really good question.
That's a very good question. Let's answer that at the end as well. That's a good question.
And then you might also choose to save this for the end as well. What parts of his teachings do you not like? Please tell me. Just so I can explore different ideas here. I want to meet him.
That's a very big topic. We'd have to do it one at a time. His book is very much an overview of ideas in Qigong from his perspective and what he had learned back in, I think, the 90s or whenever he wrote it. I think his own perspective as well has changed since then. I'm hoping he'll write a second version or something, updated a bit. But I think he's the kind of guy that's always moving forward. He's a very good businessman. That's one of those skills as well. Softening all the way through the calf, softening that musculature on the outside, releasing everything, letting it be warm. Remember that all of this is opening and releasing down. So have that intention as you are softening. Same thing here, warming spleen 6, kidney 3. If you notice a little extra cold in these areas, just take extra time. Or put a hot pad there. But don't allow cold to remain in your channels. It's not good for you. Don't invite trouble. Ah, feels nice.
It does, yeah.
Looks like the snow is slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
Ah. Kidney 1, spleen 3, spleen 4, liver 3, liver 2, even kidney 2. So if you look up those points, you can see the area that we're softening through. But again, it's not just the points. It's the array of fascial web that spreads through this area that we want to warm and to release in the appropriate direction. Smoothing it out like you are, I don't know, ironing a shirt or spreading dough. That's a good metaphor for this. Anna, you work with the fascia a lot. Maybe you have a good metaphor.
I think of kneading dough when we do the calves. So
That's a good one, yeah.
Like a cat.
Ah, feels good. Yes. Yes. Remember that you do want your awareness to be settling into what you're doing. Eventually that becomes very easy. But there's this quality of the mind that is like letting fluid soak into the tissues. In fact, in the Chinese, they'll talk about it as mind fluid, this jin, this fluid. And it soaks into your tissues. Softness itself accumulates in your tissues. And when your awareness rests there and the qi flows there, it's as though it moistens and plumps them. There's this term called ru, which is like this fullness in the tissues. Feels amazing. And so you want to let your mind be fully present with what you're doing. And I always want to make sure that I answer questions and provide context. And sometimes with some of the people that ask, this may be the only chance that I get to get this information out there in a world filled with bad Qigong information, in my opinion. And so I'm really happy to share it, and I'm happy that people ask. And at the same time, I want to make sure that you get to be in your practice so that your awareness moves the qi and this fluid, in a sense, into the tissues to soften them. And so always do keep asking questions, everybody. And at the same time, make sure that you take the time for your practice so that the questions aren't destroying your practice.
In response to your earlier question, Anna says that she always remembers the sea with the fascia.
The sea. I love that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. During practice, it feels like the ocean too. I agree. During Taiji, there's these wonderful swells and expanses of the ocean that I love.
Del says, I would like an updated version of the Way of Qigong. I really liked his section on empirical studies proving the efficacy of Qigong and all the correlates of Qi.
Mm-hmm.
Really great stuff. Bioelectricity being the most common correlate of Qi, apparently.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I would argue with. He's defining Qi. Well, and I mean, everybody defines Qi in the way that's appropriate. And that's appropriate to the word Qi. Again, I'll save it till the very end. So I want to make sure I'm not sounding like I'm criticizing Ken Cohen. Everybody has a perspective and a way of teaching. And he's a wonderful teacher and a wonderful guy. And so if I leave you with any impression, it should be that. Hopefully this year when he's on his tour before he travels to Europe, he will stop by the monastery again. We can have tea, hang out. Maybe my guqin will be well enough by then to play for him. We'll see. He's an artsy sort of dude. He likes that kind of thing. Tea and poetry and meandering walks.
Dale says, please tell him I said hi, just some stranger online if you ask to.
I absolutely won't do that. But he feels your love. He's a very popular guy. I actually asked him once, I said, there's this thing that people say that if you're very famous and your words or your image is out there, that either it takes your qi, and so a lot of Taoists refuse to be well known because they think it absorbs their qi, or other people think that like rock stars, you get waves of energy. And I said, see, you're one of the few like really famous Taoists that I felt comfortable enough to talk to about it. And he said, actually, I didn't notice a difference at all. I was like, okay, that's good answer. I appreciate his honesty about it. People like to make stuff up too often, and he doesn't seem to do that. A very good sign, I think.
Yeah, could be super grounded.
He seems very grounded in his way. Yeah, in his artsy way. I think actually his practice with the First Nations, I think the Lakota and his wife as well, she's a Native American. And it seems like his work with them was really impactful and healing for him. And it informs a lot of his teachings. And so there's this kind of interesting accent and flavor to everything he teaches now. Although he tries to keep them separate, but I can tell the difference. Seems like it's been really good for him. You want to try sitting on this?
Sure.
It's a fancy stool. You should like it.
Chris asks, what are the leg channels?
What are they?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand the question.
Or sorry, maybe I read it wrong. What are these leg channels? The ones that we were just focusing on, I assume.
Oh, with that sweeping motion? Yeah, sorry, Chris. The questions always take minutes to come through, so we're lost by the time they come through. That we work with the 6 primary leg channels, not including extraordinary vessels and this kind of work. We're working with something called sinew channels and things like that, collaterals, and so that gets confusing. But there are 3 primary yang channels on the leg and 3 primary yin channels on the leg. So without getting into the weeds again, I don't want to confuse people too much. We'll just say the 6 primary channels on the leg. And for our purposes, we just want to make sure that we're opening the entire yang side, like the outside and back of the leg in one direction, and the entire inside and front of the leg in the other direction. Sweeping and moving all of them as best you can. Circling the toes. Full release all the way up to the sitting bones, circling all the way around. But I love that you're learning about the specific channels, and I highly recommend you continue because it really does deepen this practice. It just becomes very into the weeds at some point, and I don't want people to feel confused. I already include a lot through the numbers and things.
He says thanks.
Sure, yeah. It's a good question, though.
And Dell asks, when are we going to get a book from you, John? It would be nice.
Give me another 30 years or so. I may put out a book for the snake and turtle. I want to be able to dedicate it to Shoko-san and make it so that all the money goes to her as a way to support her because she's amazing. Just another wonderful teacher. And so she's the one that taught me snake and turtle. So I may put that out just to have it out, a couple levels of snake and turtle. But I don't know yet. It may still be some decades. I'm learning so much that every time a year passes, I think, oh, it's a good thing I didn't put out a book last year because I didn't know this piece. And I assume that never ends. And so.
Is it worth mentioning your blog?
My blog? You can mention my blog.
He has a blog on snakeandturtle.com where I believe he's kind of basically like transcribed all of the classes.
Yeah, it's just mostly the classes.
Yeah.
And so it's the same stuff you find in video. But there are genuine masters who I'm trying to get to write books that are hesitant to write books because that's the way of a lot of masters. And so them first, I think, is a better way of doing it. So if you should hear anybody's voice, it should be theirs. I'm just some guy on the internet. Although I do have fabulous pants.
Very fabulous.
They match my microphone, although you can't see that. Folding at the hips, softening so that you're not rounding forward, but simply moving from here. Don't grip your thighs. Lengthen your spine. Lengthening all the way up to the crown of the head, floating up, shoulders soft. Continue lengthening over the top. Reaching only as far as is absolutely comfortable. You're not trying to look for a feeling of stretch or strain. Please listen to your body.
And Del says you have swag for sure.
You're the only one that thinks so, Del. But coming from you, that means a lot. When I was in the clinics in Costa Rica, I would dress very professionally. I'd wear my button-down silk shirts and things. But to keep from seeming too serious, I would always wear ridiculous socks. I aspire to one day dress like Corry.
He says unique styles are inherently swag.
Thanks. You changed the way I think about it. So what we were doing is softening our tissues long. We're lengthening. So any compression or tension that you have going on is going to stop that flow. So just release through. You're gathering from kidney 1 all the way up to the back. Lengthen your legs because you're softening them. Lengthen your spine this way. And then circle over. Only as far as feels comfortable. And then release. No stretching. Just softness. And if this is uncomfortable on your back or your thighs, probably just sitting on a higher bolster or a chair will help. Oh.
Corey asks, at some point, would you be up for showing a baby version of that folding forward exercise?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I should probably be sitting on something, but the baby version of that.
They say I have trouble doing it all without tightening my thighs.
Oh, sure. I'm not sure how much you heard of that, but they were asking about this movement that we were doing, the lengthening the kidney channel movement. Corey, did you see when we talked about this? And I will assume no, because it'll take a while for your response to come through. Sorry about that. So basically, instead of pulling forward, this is a very good question. First, make sure you're seated high enough off of the ground. Maybe if I was sitting on a cushion like this or something, that will make it easier for your hips to fold without having to hold yourself up. Because again, that tension here is probably because of your lower back in this shape happening. So you have to grip in order to hold yourself up, kind of like you're doing this sort of shape, but flat. And I know you have this pain and tension here anyway, that I'd still like to work on.
And they said yes in answer to your question
Oh,
earlier.
thank you. Isn't Mel great? Mel's so great. So instead, what ZhiCheng recommends, because he's a genius, is to walk your hands down and keep this soft. And if you're unable to just sit like this and have it be soft, then it's more of something you should just be maybe skipping this exercise and sitting in a chair until you can start to release this. Because if it's perma-flexed, then that's something else. That acupuncture can probably help, or releasing massage, just spending extra time there. But if you are able to soften it, period, then when you sit, if you can start with it soft, first find a way to sit with it soft. And then instead of imagining that you're pulling yourself forward, because then it's the way you're thinking about the movement that's the problem. Because you're trying to do this and you're trying to pull yourself in, because that's what these muscles do. Instead, if anything, you're going around. This actually opens. It's the opposite direction. And so you have to find a way to let this lengthen open rather than to pull yourself down. So you're going this way and then around in a circle with this continuing to open rather than shortening through tension.
They said, I don't think I can sit in that position at all with it soft.
Okay, that's fair. And again, I should be sitting on a bolster of some kind, so to make it easier to see what it looks like.
Do you want these?
No, it's okay. It will look the same anyway. But do recognize that if you can sit higher, even on a stool like the one that Chris donated, and see if you can create this kind of motion while keeping this soft. And if you can, then that just means it's a measure of how high off the ground you are. And that is a very common problem with seated meditation practice, that people will do some sort of seated posture. And they think that this is the meditation. And it is, ZhiCheng tells everybody, although nobody listens to him, he tells everybody to start in a chair. Because this posture, sitting on the ground, is so uncomfortable for people that it is the main reason people don't meditate. At the last retreat, I had to convince somebody to go meditate because he said, it hurts too much for me to sit there. I'm like, does it hurt to sit in a chair? He said, no. So why don't you sit in a chair? Because he thought this was the practice. And this is just you sitting still. And so in the same light, if you can, find the comfortable way to do it, and then slowly ease yourself in the direction of whatever a full release would look like. But always stay in the comfort zone, because anytime we push ourselves past it, now we're practicing tension and we've lost it. You don't want to push into that red zone. Always stay where it's easy and open, and let the easy open space spread.
Yeah, this is a real challenge for a lot of us. Chris says, same here, that position is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And Corry says, I have a 4-inch bolster, but it's not enough. And I feel the same way. I don't think I found the height yet for this particular movement practice to be comfortable. And so I'm kind of like accepting a degree of pain.
Yeah,
but
I
recognize that that's not the appropriate way to practice either.
Yeah, so that's right. I'm sorry. I'll try to find a good bolster for the next class, just so I'm not repping bad technique. Because I don't want people to copy me. It's the same thing that happens in ZhiCheng's classes. He'll do a thing like he releases his hip and his leg comes off the floor because his hip is so released. But the people who can't release their hip, they just lift their legs off the floor and they add all this tension. And even when he tells them not to do it, they still copy him because they want to look like him. But please always stay in the realm of what your body is softened and open, able to do. Because as you know, as well as anybody, everyone's body is different and at different stages of their life and even times of the day. And so find that sweet open space and then rest in that and let that healing then spread through the other more difficult postures if you want to.
So Corry asks, doing the fingers crawling forward motion while sitting in a chair, is that a good start?
Sure, I think that's a good start. Yeah, that's a place. I'll just grab the stool and do it again. Do-do-do. Oh, la, 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 la. This is a very important question. I'm glad that you asked.
Yeah, me too.
So I'll even, start high here. This crazy, awesome new stool. And so let's say I do it here, and I can sit here, and my hips can flex enough, and I can poke around and say, oh yeah, this is softer. And this is great. Oh, okay, soft here. And then maybe I practice doing this kind of movement. And it's awkward because now I'm in a completely different position, but to have this feeling and to be able to do that with this soft, and then I lower myself a little bit and I do it again and I go, yeah, still soft. And then I go a little lower. I don't know how low this goes. Right there. And now I try it again. I, I hold with my feet to pull chi up through to my back. And then I lift and then I fall. From my hips, the same way, see how my back isn't rounding? Only as far as I can, even in this position. And I come up, hips still soft. And then from here, you would go a little lower. And there's a line there where suddenly your body goes, whoop, too far. And then back off a bit. So you're not in that zone of being pushed. Stay soft. And then over time, it will feel effortless to sink lower and stay in the effortless open zone. The cooking time that Shifu talks about, how long you cook your vegetables, that process happens in the practice itself. You don't have to push it. It'll naturally feel easier to sit lower and lower, and you never have to hurt yourself to get there. That's a strange Western no pain, no gain thing. We have to leave that entirely behind because that just induces more tension as the body protects itself.
Corry asks, can you show us a version to do without the curling feet and hands? Because even when I can soften my thighs, if I curl my feet, I lose it. Okay.
So then it becomes a separate practice. But this is one you can certainly do. And again, this comes from the seated 8 pieces of gold, Badwanjin. So this kind of position, again, you should be seated up on the bolster. And you could literally just make circles like this. And the goal here, again, is softening at the hips. So all of this stays long. And you're just making circles while sitting up on the bolster. softening the hips, or you could just sit here again. Your butt is up here. Just pretend. And, flexing here, keeping your back comfortably long, and very gently making circles. You can row the boat in both directions with an emphasis on letting chi flow down toward the feet as you do this. And this whole time, this stays soft. And your hands and your feet are soft. And in a way, that kidney lengthening practice that you're having difficulty with, it incorporates this, and it has a few other pieces in it just to make sure that our hands and our feet and our back are being used in a certain way, which is beneficial. But it stops being beneficial the second we start introducing tension. So I really like that you're taking it slow. And in fact, we did this series in one of the early classes before doing that one, so I think maybe you missed it. But this is another version of that seated eight brocades thing. You're just kind of sitting comfortably. And again, your butt can be all the way up high on something. And you're just very gently softening in your hips this direction so that it's not in your back, so that your spine remains long, your neck remains long, and the movement goes this way. And I don't feel a stretch at all. And I would never want to feel a stretch. You've gone too far if your body starts pulling back. But you can be very flexible without ever pushing into yourself. And instead, that soft, flexible space opens and becomes something different. And you become flexible the way a baby's flexible, not like a gymnast is flexible. That's different. I hope that answered that.
Yeah, so Del had a comment here that I thought was really interesting, and it kind of raised another question in my mind. So he says 70% effort is good. Like, don't go beyond 70% of your capacity, generally speaking. That number will change as you grow your tendons. And it makes me think of, correct me if I'm misremembering, but I think ZhiCheng Shifu has used the word uncomfortable, or discomfort. Like, you might experience some discomfort as your body starts to change, and that can be expected.
Yeah.
And he also talks about like this idea of, quote, applying fire, I think, within that context. And so I wonder if it's worth distinguishing discomfort that we should expect as our bodies change from pain.
Right. Yeah. The huo, this firing time that they talk about in Chinese, is important. And there really is a difference between the discomfort that comes as your body changes, which everybody who's practiced Qigong starts to feel, just as your shoulders start to soften, or maybe only one will soften. And suddenly it aches all the time because it's moving in ways that it hasn't moved in decades. And all of those old tears and injuries start to be forced to heal. And it's uncomfortable. But that's a kind of good discomfort as long as you're not going too fast with it. The same thing happens, of course, with people that have been exhausted for a really long time and not letting themselves feel their fatigue, to Dale's question from earlier. And so suddenly they start relaxing and all of their adrenaline and stress hormones go away, and they feel exhausted all the time because they're no longer pumping themselves up with these stress hormones. So they're healthier, and in a way they're more rested, but because their awareness is deepened, suddenly they feel worse because they can feel. And that's a good sign. So part of this learning to differentiate between that which is unhealthy and healthy, discomfort is good, because your body is forced to do things that it's not comfortable with, because its comfort zone is in some place that's not healthy. And so that is a difficult exchange, like the difficulty of letting yourself be sick or letting yourself feel emotionally vulnerable. The first time you do that, oh my gosh, it's wildly uncomfortable. But it's the right kind of discomfort. And so that is a hard line to fix. And so Mel's right. So you do want to do the practice. That's that firing time. Be in the fire of change, that fire of transformation for a little while, and have the right kind of discomfort, the discomfort of transformation, but not the discomfort of damage. And that can be a difficult line to find. And please do err on the side of comfortable. Err on the easy side, because you'll change anyway if you keep doing it. But if you push too far into that, not knowing where that line is, you can injure yourself. And too many people injure themselves doing these health practices. So don't do it.
Chris, Corry, and Del all say thank you. Very helpful.
Thanks, everybody.
Well said. It really takes getting a feel for.
It does. And before I answer more questions, let's do just a moment of settling, because I know some people need to leave. So that closing movement, sinking down, letting everything settle behind the navel. And if you'd like to lay flat, you're welcome to. This was one of those more question answer style classes. And so I want to make sure that at the very least we end with this deep settling. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you being here. If you have to leave, I understand. And I'll answer questions for a little while. Since I don't have a class later today, it makes it easier. So, want to remind me of some of the questions? Mel is the arbiter of all things.
Anna sends a hand and many trees emojis.
Thank you. Is this the one? Yes. Is that? Thank you, Anna. We love you.
So I will scroll back through the chat and see if there were any questions that we deferred.
Okay.
And in the meantime, if anyone has any others, feel free to put them in and I'll
Yes, please.
read them.
And Anna, thank you for adding your wisdom of your metaphors. Anytime you feel like adding your own experience in, it's welcome.
There was the tea question about tea sharing its wisdom with the drinker.
Oh, yeah, sure. So the two halves of that. One is the way of tea piece. Probably came up because I was talking about Ken Cohen, and he's another follower of the way of tea. And that was the way I first interacted with him, as I was part of that world working at a tea house. I ran a little tea house in the botanical gardens and studied pretty intensively this meditative method of tea, the way that now I'm studying the Guqin, the musical style of Daoist expression. That is deeply embedded in the world of tea as well, to be a tea person, a cha ren. And that culture and that meditative practice is wonderfully healing and includes a lot of Qigong and Daoist principles worth exploring for people who enjoy it. The Japanese tea ceremony is more famous, but it has a different feel than the Kung Fu tea ceremony of Taoism. That is more about enjoyment and relaxation and space, and I just think it's wonderful as a practice. And as far as the wisdom of the tea plants themselves, as plant healers and plant teachers, that is a thing that people talk about quite a lot and is pretty deeply embedded in, especially Buddhist backdrop, and of course in Taoism and Chinese medicine as well, because of the herbal quality of the tea. And so I'm a big tea fan for those of whom enjoy it. And I think there's a lot to be gained from taking part in the tea plant that way.
So this is good feedback. Mag says, thanks, John and all. I don't understand most of the questions and answers, but very happy to be here and copy the movements best I can. Good night, one and all. Smiley face.
Thank you, Max. I'm glad you made it. It got a little heavy into theory today, and so I apologize for that. I'll try to make tomorrow's class quiet. I do want every class to be different and each to emphasize something slightly different, and so it's okay for it to go like this. And at the same time, it's also really nice to just settle into practice. And if you have any questions about the specific movements, please do feel free to ask.
Dell asks, can you recommend me some of your favorite Chinese teas, preferably from that website you told me about?
Oh, at 7 Cups. Gosh. At least for me, where I am up here, in the cold and the wet, it is really nice to drink teas that tend to be more warming. The teas that come from the Camellia sinensis plant, green tea, oolong tea, black tea, pu'er tea, these kind of tea collection, there are the teas that grow more warming as they're processed. Like pu'er is basically composted tea. It sits and it warms and turns black. Whereas black tea is oxidized really strongly or even smoked, depending on the kind of tea you get. And so up here in this weather at this time, I tend to enjoy the darker, like the rock oolongs. I really enjoy. I really like certain black teas, and the black pu'er is really warming and wonderfully nourishing. I have a history of dealing with migraines, and one of the few medicines for a very long time that helped me with my migraines was a rock oolong tea called Da Hong Pao, which is the big red robe. And it's a really strong rock oolong tea and expensive, so I don't necessarily recommend it. I was getting it for free from the tea master, so I was able to drink it. But that really helped for a lot of some meditative induced migraines and things that I had, and also being punched in the head too often, migraines. And for general nourishing at this time of year, often black pu'er is really good. In studies, black pu'er, for instance, works as well as Lipitor, the most widely prescribed high cholesterol medicine. And so these teas are strong herbal medicines that are worth drinking, and they just taste nice. But if you're going to be over in Arizona, hot and dry most of the time, you might want to lean more into like the silver needle white teas or the light green teas, like the Longqing, the dragon well teas and things. Those might be really beneficial for you.
And for those who like the smell of the forest, they have a tea called Woodland.
Woodland pu'er. If you tell everyone to buy it, there's not going to be any for you. That's a black pu'er called Woodland that Mel discovered and just loves.
Chris asks, do we have to start at the head, or can we start on the neck or chest?
Right.
Don't want any more energy up there and don't think I can sink properly. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yes, that was a question from earlier.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason why we spend all this time pulling down is because when we start in the head, because we were going to spend all the time going down, so it should help the chi sink down. And so as long as you're warm and generous with your attention, it shouldn't be a problem that things are stuck in your head. And again, some of the difficulty of that is whether or not you know how to soften. And if you're attacking the points and you're being really aggressive and you're doing these things, then of course that agitates the chi and makes the chi raise, in which case you would want to avoid the head. But if you're being attentive and gentle and loving, that should help these points on the head open and soften. And that actually allows chi to sink more easily, because again, we're releasing chi that's stuck. We're not trying to push chi. We're just allowing things to go like this. And that's very different. But you have to be approaching it like that. This loving, like touching a sleeping baby. That's maybe having a bad dream. That quality, which is very different than like, all right, now I'm going to get this point to do a thing. And I know that some of us have a tendency to move in that direction. And so this is an antidote to that. And so if you can be more the gentle, loving touch, then that should actually help the chi to sink out of the head that's trapped there in these points that are stuck. And so hopefully that helps answer that question. And then just make sure that you spend enough time really down below. Don't just stop up here when you're done. Take the time to go down. And that should really help. I hope.
And Dell expressed an interest in hearing more about meditative-induced migraines.
Yeah, that's another thing that I talk about a few different times in my Free and Easy Wandering series. It's just one of the effects of improperly practiced meditation. If you try to go too fast with meditative awakening, which happens, then too much chi is dumped into your system all at once and it all rushes upward. Too much emotional energy is released. Your body is suddenly shaking and vibrant. A lot of the things that we call Kundalini awakenings are considered very bad practices in Daoist meditative circles. They're considered problems. And I personally know lots of people who have been damaged from normal meditation practices and things. Again, I talk about this. I have a whole video about it. If you look it up, Is Meditation Dangerous? I think I called it. And this is that thing. And some of it is just the habit of gripping with the mind, knowing how to concentrate by putting your mind in a place, and it causes chi to rush up because we never learned how to let go of the mind. And these are things, and I've been studying this since I was a kid with lots of masters, the so-called masters. And they taught me lots of bad habits, as a lot of people are learning. And I had to travel here to come back to the States, which I didn't intend to do, to study with a master who could finally teach me how to let go. And that's the important skill that I want everybody to learn. That everything we do that's like this is bad for us. Period. It's possible to go and to soften. And all of the things we're aiming for can still be achieved through this softness. That's why I'm trying to prove it through this art piece that I'm making with my instrument. That I want people to see me go from absolute beginner, never having even touched the instrument, to some form of skilled musician. And I want to document the whole process. This is my art documentary piece idea that I have. And never be strained or stressed or caught up, never feeling anything but just gentle, peaceful awareness. Because we have this idea in our culture that in order to accomplish things, we have to push and strain. And instead, what I want to do is show the possibility of something else, of letting go, and what can be accomplished from that. I think you can get more out of that. And so, yeah, that's one of the common causes of headaches and lots of symptoms from incorrect practice. It's because we clench the mind, we clench our body, and we force things instead of allow things.
Chris asks, if we keep the mind focused on the mind itself while doing this, does missing this vital part make it an unhealthy practice?
I don't think I understand the question. Can you read it again?
If we keep the mind focused on the mind itself while doing this, does missing this vital part make it an unhealthy practice? So I wonder if the question is, if we're focusing on the mind, are we missing the opportunity to nourish and cultivate properly?
Yeah.
Maybe Chris, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that one of the nice things about this set is that even for people that are very caught in their mind, they can still soften their body and still get something out of these practices. Of course, what we want to do eventually is to get free of being caught in the mind all the time. But I know that for some people, that is a really big ask. And that's why for those people, we don't give them certain kinds of Qigong practices. Because if you do certain kinds of Qigong practices while you're caught in your mind, it creates delusions, it creates all kinds of problems, very famously. And so instead, what we're doing here is just opening the body. And I think that even if you're lost in a fantasy or talking to yourself, as long as you're not getting aggressive with your body, it will open and soften and continue to heal. And I think this is a very safe set. And one of the ways, in many ways, I think that this is one of the most safe sets I've ever seen. And that's one of the reasons I like to share it.
Sounds like that addressed that question. And then he had another one. So the face is safe as long as we're not adding energy. We're, quote, unstagnating it and letting it drop.
That's right.
But we need to keep our mind focused on the area and have the right intent.
Yeah, and when we say focused, we're just gently aware, not focused in like a laser, but aware of the space, aware of what we're doing with the intent of being loving and gentle. And again, if your mind wanders off and you're just, you're watching cartoons or something while gently opening points and softening the tissues, then you're still getting some benefit. That's okay. Yeah.
I think that is all the questions.
Amazing.
And Del says, thank you. I have been a bad Taoist and playing around with yogic practices that have been giving me rushes of energy.
Yeah. Now, we can get really addicted to rushes of energy. As a general rule, and this sounds really counterintuitive, if you can feel it, then it's bad for you. And what I mean by that is if I have a cord here, so I'll try to move this too loudly. Corey warned me I was being loud with the microphone. This cord here, if I reach over and touch it and it's hot, something is wrong. We have a problem here. And that's the way a lot of sensation is. Sensation is like heat here, where there's a blockage in the flow. If there's an obstruction, I start to get heat. I start to get problems showing up. In my body, if I feel strong, for instance, if I'm doing my practice and I feel really strong, I remember telling a friend that I felt like a truck had hit me and I wouldn't move. I feel so strong. That's actually a really bad sign. It means your chi is flowing into obstructions and your body is feeling it push back, and it makes us feel strong and stable. If you're feeling rushes of energy, that's a bad sign, because instead of it being incorporated into your system and used in the appropriate way and just sort of filling you and making you feel peaceful and awake in this balanced long-term way, if it's a rush, that push is going to come with a trough later, and it's going to burn out aspects of your body. It's a bad sign. If you're getting rushes of joy and pleasure, this is why drugs and things will often cause damage, because you get this big change, but that change comes as a cost, and it can do damage to your system. We talk about it burning the channels. This is the traditional way of talking about it. And so even, for instance, from the neurochemical perspective, people will take ecstasy or something, and you can actually see how after they get flooded with this neural hormone in their brain, these neurochemicals, that their brain later becomes less able to interact with those. And so there's a discussion that you can have a high of a really strong, good feeling, and then it may take years and years for you ever to be able to feel good like that again, because you damaged that delicate balance in the brain. And that, of course, doesn't always happen. But that's one example of how if we seek a high, there's always a low that is much worse than the high. And this is that thing in Buddhism and Taoism, like if we're craving change, if we're trying to make things happen and we want to feel good, it always comes at a cost that's much greater than you think. And so the very classic thing to say is to clear the mind and abandon desire. 清心寡欲, 国语, 清心国语. Clear the heart mind, abandon desire. And if you follow any practice that's through your brain or through desire, it always leads to bad ends. And so that's why we have all these practices based on just light, good feelings, slow cultivation and development, because that always leaves you in a much better place.
Couple comments. Steph says, your hands do match your mind.
They do. Isn't that awesome? Yes, check that out. Yes.
That's pretty amazing.
It's called the Blue Yeti. It says blue right on here.
Chris says, yeah, that's spot on. Handling and opening sounds so similar to MDMA experiences.
Yep. And it causes whiplash. And I know for a lot of people, it can be a really good thing in the moment. And then later it can make it more difficult for your body, for your mind, for your emotions. Now you've supercharged centers, you've burned your channels, and it can become harder to return. And there are safer, better ways to do it. And after that, after you experience those things, you have to go through this whole process of healing that, of course, culturally, we don't know how to do because of all the things we talked about before. So it's very important to understand this piece.
Yeah.
No shortcuts.
Del had a question. I think for the most part you answered, but I'll just mention it anyway. Is intense swaying like you are possessed or drunk normal when meditating?
Well, it depends. This is always the answer. It depends. I'm sorry for that answer.
Should we move the mic away if it's too loud?
Oh, it might be too loud. I apologize. So, back to my seamless production set. my lights that were also donated. Two things. For years when I was meditating, I would do my Zen postures and my practices. I'd be sitting here and my body would do this. For 2 decades or something, this would happen. And all of my teachers, and if I went to a monastery and did a long sit, you'd see a whole room of people doing things like this, or swaying side to side or front and back. And it's because their heart was beating. And their hips are soft enough to allow the movement, which is good. But the problem is that it means that your heart should be moving. There should be movement inside, and that there should be enough space for it to move without running into anything. And when that pressure wave of your heartbeat runs into something, it pushes you. It pushes you. And so it wasn't until I moved up here to study with ZhiCheng that stopped, because I softened those places inside me that were hard. And so that's one kind of movement during meditation, that it's coming from an obstruction. And funnily enough, so is the other one. The other one can be flopping around. It can have, you have spontaneous movement. Sometimes it happens very much like when you're going to sleep and you jerk as your nervous system is trying to soften and it's at a high alert and you're asking it to soften, and it has this kind of release of energy. Like I was talking about how if you go too fast through meditation processes, a big amount of chi is released and it does whatever it does. And oftentimes in meditation, people's nervous systems are way too tuned up, or they're doing a practice that is charging up their system. And so they're holding still while they're feeding into their system this message of more, 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 more. And so their body takes over and starts jerking and moving. And because it's interesting, and sometimes it can feel good, whole systems have been built around trying to create that. And we would say that's a bad sign, in the way that me having my heart push me around was a sign of a blockage. That what I want is my system to peacefully release, to sort of outgas any of that excess chi, to release my nervous system, to my mind to quiet. Everything is cultivated together as it settles into peacitude, which is a word I just invented. And when we either, again, go too fast, or we're doing incorrect practices, improper methods, then often chi sort of releases and it runs into a blockage in our mind. So we see something, we imagine we see things, we hear voices, we feel really strong things, or our body goes, whoa. And it can be neat. And we seem to like, it's again, like I was talking about craving experiences. We want those feelings, but those are almost always a bad sign. There are certain positive markers that people can talk about, but they happen on their own, and they're not things you try to create. And if you do try to create them, you actually obstruct them and cause problems. And so in general, it's again, more of the Kundalini style symptoms. I highly recommend staying away from it. And I say this again, just after a lifetime of treating people with those illnesses, it ruins lives. And some of these people they run meditation centers and they run retreat centers, and it's like the raw food thing. I've treated so many raw foodists who are teaching and treating and telling people to do these things. And when I'm their doctor, I find out it's destroyed their body. Like, oh, okay, well, the public face is one thing, and then you get them honest in the back room. And it's the same with the meditation people, the breatharians that I happen to know a couple famous breatharians that are liars. You talk to the people who are changing their beds and changing their trash, and we're like, oh, wow, they're living on Snickers bars. And don't go that direction, because it causes problems. And it's much less sexy to just settle into peace and comfort and calm, and to rest and to eat well and slowly heal that way. It takes longer. It's not interesting, but that's a good sign. That means it's going to last. And that's the direction it's worth taking, in my opinion.
They'll ask, so that's your heart pushing you around from an obstruction, that movement?
This one, yeah. That's your heartbeat naturally happening. I mean, not just your heart, but your liver's pumping. Like I can feel all my organs moving, and there's movement that happens in a spiral through your body. And if I hold on to anything, that movement pushes you around. And if I make enough space and soften, then things become still, but not still because I'm holding myself still, but because I've made room for the movement that's always happening inside. And it's okay to move a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to recognize where it's coming from.
And I want to be mindful of the time. It is 2. We do have lots of other comments that raise many, many good questions and conversation points. So I will mention them now if that's okay.
Sure, okay.
Yeah. So Del says, I might need a new brain, to be honest, hoping Qigong can give me a new one, which I think is an interesting observation because I don't know if you want to speak to that. I think about like how this practice affects neuroplasticity, like the flexibility that we gain through releasing the nervous system, relaxing.
I'm going to move the mic closer to you so that you're just as likely.
There are other comments here. This one's really interesting too. In Buddhism, I recently learned it's okay to have desire to not have unwanted feelings or cravings come up. For example, is a good desire, right thinking. But my Shifu told me not to mix Buddhism and Taoism, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, that comes into these different systems. So yeah, famously the desire to wake up, they say is the last desire to go. They say it's like you use it. You have a bonfire stick that's poking the bonfire, and then toward the very end of the fire, once the fire is raging, you throw that stick into. So even that desire goes away. So all desire eventually, that aspect of you that's capable of desiring, it just evaporates. And so that's one piece. The other about Buddhism and Taoism being separated, it depends on the system that you have. I actually study in a system, the Longmen tradition, part of the Complete Reality sect, Zhichen, and that is a blend of these various systems. Certain Buddhist methods, Taoist internal alchemical methods, even like some Confucian practices of ethics, and everything gets mixed together into this system of study. And so it's kind of the mixed martial arts of the the internal world, and so it's a lot of fun. So in that case, I would just have to disagree with your instructor saying that it depends on the style of Buddhism and Taoism that you're practicing.
And Steph and Chris say good night.
Good night. I know you were up very late. I appreciate you. If you want to follow any of the stuff, remember, it's just save the link and you can watch it later or find it on Patreon. You guys are both there. Any other questions?
Del says, yeah, my Shifu would say, quote, would you ever mix 2 medicines?
Yeah, that's actually something Ken Cohen says too when he's talking about the American, the Native American traditions, the First Nations peoples, like the Lakota tradition. I can't remember the other tradition he follows. But we say, yes, it becomes a formula. And that's the basic level of treatment in Chinese medicine. And so it depends on what you're getting from it and how you're choosing to take it. But there are certainly lots of Taoist systems that are very separate. And there are Buddhist systems, especially the religious systems, because the system that I practice is religious. It's purely philosophical, practical in that sense. But the religious traditions, of course, don't mix very well because they have very strong dogmatic beliefs. And those don't fit well together for sure.
Yeah, he said mixing 2 medicines is bad. LOL. I think that's all. He says thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for all the great questions. I hope people learned from it. And keep them coming if you like. And do give your instructor my best if you see him. He probably doesn't know who I am. But I appreciate that there's people like him out there teaching and sharing their quality practice. And there's just so many differences in the world that, we can't claim to know anything, or we just do our best with the system that we have. And it's not like there's a right way toward health. There's lots of pathways toward health and healing. I just happen to have access to these few, and so those are the ones that I share. But who can know what's right? We just do our best. Walking together on this long pathway.
Phil says, I love these Tao talks.
They're fun.
Too.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your practice.